In the heart of the vast and open plains of 19th century Texas, where the land stretched endlessly under a sky that seemed too big for the world, a Comanche woman named Naya walked with her young daughter, Ayanna. The sun hung high above them, burning relentlessly, its heat pressing down like an invisible weight. They had been walking for days, their feet sore and blistered from the rough ground. Their journey was not one of choice, but of necessity. Naya's tribe had left them behind, abandoning them in a place where survival felt impossible. Naya carried a small pouch slung across her shoulder, its contents meager, a few strips of dried meat, some wild berries she had gathered along the way, and a small knife passed down from her mother. Her belly was swollen with child, a new life growing inside her despite the harshness of their circumstances. She placed a protective hand on her abdomen as she walked, whispering soft prayers to the spirits of her ancestors, asking for guidance and strength. Beside her, Ayanna clutched her mother's hand tightly, her small face streaked with dirt and tears. At only 6 years old, she didn't fully understand why they were alone, or why the people who had always cared for them were now gone. The reasons for their abandonment were complicated, born out of fear and desperation. The Comanche people had faced increasing pressure from settlers encroaching on their lands. Food was scarce, and tensions ran high. Naya's condition made her a burden, and the tribe's leaders believed it would be safer for everyone if she and Ayanna were left to fend for themselves. It was a cruel decision, but in the eyes of the tribe, it was necessary for survival. Naya tried not to dwell on the pain of being cast out. Instead, she focused on keeping herself and her daughter alive, step by agonizing step. Each day brought new challenges. The water they had started with was nearly gone, and finding more proved difficult. Streams were rare in this part of the plains, and when they did find one, it was often muddy and unfit to drink. Hunger gnawed at them constantly, the little food they had dwindling faster than Naya had hoped. At night they huddled together under the stars, using whatever scraps of cloth they could find to shield themselves from the cold. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by the howls of distant coyotes and the rustling of unseen creatures in the tall grass. Despite the hardships, Naya refused to give up. She told herself that she had to keep moving, not just for herself, but for Ayanna and the baby growing inside her. Every morning she woke with a renewed determination, urging her weary body forward even when every muscle screamed in protest. Ayanna, though young, seemed to sense her mother's resolve. She rarely complained, even when her tiny legs ached from walking or when her stomach growled with hunger. There were moments, however, when the weight of their situation became too much for the child to bear. One evening, as they sat beneath the shade of a gnarled tree, Ayanna burst into tears, sobbing uncontrollably as she cried out for her father, who had died in a raid months earlier. Naya pulled her close, rocking her gently as she fought back her own tears. "We will be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. As the days dragged on, the landscape began to change. The flat, endless plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with clusters of trees. Occasionally they would pass abandoned campsites, remnants of travelers who had come before them. These sites offered some relief, scraps of food, discarded clothing, or tools that could be repurposed. Naya taught Ayanna how to scavenge carefully, showing her which plants were safe to eat and which should be avoided. It was a skill she had learned from her own mother, one that had been passed down through generations of Comanche women. Though they found little, every morsel was a gift, a reminder that they were still alive. One afternoon, as they trudged through a particularly barren stretch of land, Naya noticed something unusual in the distance. A lone figure on horseback was approaching, moving slowly across the horizon. Her heart raced as she debated whether to hide or confront the stranger. Settlers were unpredictable, and encounters with them often ended badly for her people. But exhaustion and desperation clouded her judgment. She stood frozen, clutching Ayanna's hand tightly as the figure drew closer. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat and carried a rifle slung over his shoulder. His face was weathered, marked by years of hard living, but his eyes held no malice. He reined in his horse a few paces away, studying them with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Naya instinctively stepped in front of Ayana, shielding her with her body. The man raised his hands in a gesture of peace, speaking words she couldn't understand. His tone was calm, almost gentle, and after a moment, he dismounted, holding out a canteen of water. Naya hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to run, but thirst and fatigue won out. She accepted the canteen cautiously, taking a small sip before passing it to Ayana. The man introduced himself as Thomas, pointing to his chest and repeating his name several times until Naya nodded in understanding. He gestured toward his horse and wagon, inviting them to come with him. Naya was torn. Trusting a stranger, especially a settler, went against everything she had been taught. But looking at Ayana, whose lips were cracked and whose eyes were hollow with hunger, she knew they couldn't survive much longer on their own. With a deep breath, she took her daughter's hand and followed Thomas to his wagon. As they climbed aboard, Naya couldn't shake the feeling that this decision might save their lives or seal their fate. The ride to Thomas's homestead was long and silent, broken only by the rhythmic clopping of the horse's hooves and the occasional murmur of reassurance from Thomas. Naya kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, watching as the landscape shifted once again. The barren plains gave way to fields of golden wheat, dotted with simple wooden structures. Smoke rose lazily from chimneys, and the faint sound of laughter drifted through the air. It was a stark contrast to the desolation they had endured for so long. For the first time in weeks, Naya allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. Whatever lay ahead, she vowed to face it with the same courage and resilience that had carried her this far. As the wagon rumbled along, Naya clutched Ayana tightly, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and cautious optimism. Thomas sat quietly at the front, guiding the horse with steady hands. He occasionally glanced back at them, offering a small smile that seemed genuine but did little to ease Naya's unease. The fields they passed were alive with activity. Men plowing the earth, women hanging laundry on lines, and children chasing each other with laughter. It was a world so different from the one Naya had known, yet there was something comforting about the rhythm of it all. When they finally arrived at Thomas's homestead, Naya was struck by its simplicity. A modest wooden cabin stood at the center, surrounded by a small garden bursting with vegetables. Chickens pecked at the ground nearby, and a barn loomed in the distance. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying the scent of something warm and inviting. Before Naya could take it all in, the door opened and a woman stepped out. She was tall and sturdy, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. This was Margaret, Thomas's wife. She greeted them warmly, her voice soft and soothing despite the language barrier. Margaret wasted no time in making Naya and Ayana feel welcome. She ushered them inside, where a fire crackled in the hearth, casting a golden glow over the room. The interior was humble but cozy, with handmade furniture and shelves lined with jars of preserves. Margaret gestured for Naya to sit, then busied herself preparing tea. Ayana clung to her mother, wide-eyed and silent as she watched Margaret move around the room. The kindness in the woman's actions slowly began to break through Naya's defenses. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of safety. Thomas joined them shortly, explaining their situation to Margaret in hushed tones. Though Naya couldn't understand their words, she caught the concern in their voices and the way Margaret's expression softened when she looked at Ayana. It was clear they were discussing what to do next. After a while, Margaret knelt beside Naya, placing a hand gently on her arm. She pointed to the food simmering on the stove, a pot of stew, and mimed eating. Naya hesitated for a moment before nodding. Hunger outweighed suspicion, and she allowed Margaret to ladle a bowl of stew for her and another for Ayana. The meal was simple but nourishing, filled with chunks of potatoes, carrots, and tender meat. Ayana ate eagerly, her earlier shyness melting away as the warmth of the food spread through her body. Naya ate more slowly, savoring each bite while keeping a watchful eye on her surroundings. Despite the hospitality, she couldn't fully let her guard down. Memories of raids and violence lingered in her mind, reminding her of the dangers settlers posed to her people. Yet, There was something undeniably sincere about Thomas and Margaret's actions. They didn't seem to want anything in return, at least not yet. That night, after the dishes were cleared and the fire stoked, Margaret led Naya and Ayana to a small corner of the cabin where blankets and pillows had been laid out. It wasn't much, but it was far more comfortable than the hard ground they had slept on for weeks. Ayana curled up beside her mother, drifting off almost immediately. Naya, however, lay awake, staring at the ceiling as thoughts swirled in her mind. Was this place truly safe? Could she trust these strangers? And what would become of her unborn child? Sleep eluded her as she wrestled with these questions, the weight of uncertainty pressing heavily on her chest. The following morning brought a new routine. Margaret woke early, bustling about the cabin as sunlight streamed through the windows. She motioned for Naya to join her in the kitchen, where dough was already stretched across the table ready to be shaped into bread. Naya hesitated at first, unsure of what was expected of her, but Margaret encouraged her with smiles and gestures, showing her how to knead the dough and form it into loaves. It was unfamiliar work, but Naya found comfort in the rhythm of it, the repetitive motions helping to calm her restless mind. Meanwhile, Ayana ventured outside, drawn by the sound of laughter. Two boys roughly her age were playing near the barn, tossing a ball back and forth. At first she hung back, watching shyly from the doorway. But curiosity soon got the better of her, and she stepped closer, pointing at the ball and smiling. Tentatively, the boys exchanged glances, then grinned and waved her over. Within moments, they were laughing together, their differences forgotten in the joy of play. Naya watched from the window, her heart swelling with relief. For the first time since their abandonment, Ayana looked like a child again, free from the burdens of survival. Days turned into weeks, and life at the homestead settled into a predictable pattern. Naya helped Margaret with household chores, learning bits of English along the way. Margaret, in turn, showed interest in Naya's knowledge of herbs and plants, often asking her to identify useful ones during their walks. These exchanges, though, limited by language, fostered a growing sense of mutual respect. Naya began to see Margaret not just as a settler but as a fellow mother, someone who understood the challenges of raising children in difficult times. Thomas, too, made an effort to include Naya in their daily lives. He taught her how to use tools and tend to the animals, patiently explaining things even when she struggled to grasp his meaning. His patience reminded her of her own father, long gone now, and it softened her toward him. Still, she remained wary, knowing that trust took time to build. There were moments when old fears resurfaced, especially when neighbors visited and stared curiously at her. Some muttered under their breath, casting disapproving glances, but Thomas always intervened, firmly defending his decision to help her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, the family gathered around the fire. The boys entertained everyone with stories of their adventures while Margaret hummed a lullaby. Naya sat quietly, listening to the sounds of laughter and contentment. It was strange, she thought, how quickly life could change. Just weeks ago she and Ayana had been alone, facing death on the open plains. Now they were part of this makeshift family, sharing meals and moments of peace. But beneath the surface of this newfound stability, doubts still lingered. Naya wondered how long this arrangement could last. Would the neighbors' disapproval grow stronger? Would Thomas and Margaret tire of caring for them? And what of her own identity? Was she losing touch with her Comanche roots by staying here? These questions haunted her, even as she acknowledged the undeniable kindness of her hosts. For now, she chose to focus on the present, cherishing the moments of safety and connection. But deep down, she knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, both seen and unseen. As the weeks passed, Naya began to adapt to life at the homestead. Each day brought new lessons and small victories, helping her regain a sense of purpose. Margaret continued to teach her household skills, like baking bread and sewing clothes, while Naya shared her knowledge of medicinal herbs and natural remedies. Together, they formed an unspoken partnership, blending their strengths to keep the household running smoothly. For Naya, these exchanges were more than just practical. They were a way to bridge the gap between two very different worlds. Ayanna, too, thrived in her new surroundings. The bond she had formed with Thomas's sons, Samuel and Jacob, grew stronger with each passing day. They spent hours exploring the fields, chasing butterflies and building forts out of sticks and hay. Their laughter echoed across the land, filling the air with a joy that had been absent for far too long. Ayanna's cheeks regained their color, and her eyes sparkled with mischief once again. Watching her daughter come alive gave Naya a profound sense of relief, but it also stirred bittersweet memories of the life they had lost. Despite the growing sense of belonging, Naya couldn't shake the feeling that their presence was causing tension beyond the homestead. Neighbors who once greeted Thomas warmly now avoided him, whispering behind his back about the wild Indian living under his roof. Some made no effort to hide their disapproval, stopping by uninvited to voice their concerns. One afternoon, as Naya worked in the garden alongside Margaret, a man named Jonas appeared at the edge of the property. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a scowl that seemed permanently etched onto his face. Jonas wasted no time getting to the point. "Thomas," he called out gruffly, "you're playing a dangerous game, keeping that woman here. Folks are starting to talk." His tone was sharp, laced with accusation. Naya froze, gripping the hoe tightly in her hands as she listened. Thomas stepped forward calmly, meeting Jonas's gaze without flinching. "This is my home, Jonas," he replied firmly, "and I'll decide who stays and who goes. Naya and her children are part of this family now." The standoff lasted only a few minutes, but it left a lasting impression. Jonas eventually turned and walked away, muttering under his breath, but the damage was done. Word spread quickly among the settlers, and soon whispers of unrest reached even the most distant farms. Naya overheard fragments of conversations during trips to the market or when neighbors visited the homestead. Some accused Thomas of undermining their safety, while others claimed he was inviting trouble by associating with someone from a rival culture. The weight of these accusations hung heavy in the air, casting a shadow over the fragile peace they had built. Margaret tried to shield Naya from the gossip, offering reassurances whenever she saw doubt creeping into her eyes. "Don't listen to them," she said one evening as they sat together shelling peas. "You've done nothing wrong. This is your home now, just as much as it is ours." Her words were kind, but Naya couldn't fully believe them. She knew how easily fear could turn into hatred, and she worried that her presence might put Thomas and his family in danger. One night, unable to sleep, Naya slipped outside to sit beneath the stars. The cool breeze brushed against her skin, carrying with it the faint scent of wildflowers. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet soothe her racing thoughts. But peace eluded her. Images of her tribe flashed in her mind, their faces, their voices, the rituals they had shared under the same vast sky. She missed them deeply, even though they had cast her out. It was a complicated grief, one that twisted her heart in ways she couldn't untangle. As she sat there, lost in thought, she heard footsteps approaching. Turning, she saw Thomas walking toward her, his silhouette illuminated by the soft glow of the lantern he carried. He hesitated for a moment before sitting beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. Neither spoke for a while, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves. Finally, Thomas broke the quiet. "I know things have been hard for you," he began, his voice low and measured. "And I know people say things they shouldn't. But I want you to know, you're safe here. My family will always stand by you." Naya looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his words. She nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. Gratitude welled up inside her, mingled with guilt for the burden she felt she was placing on them. "Thank you," she murmured softly, the phrase unfamiliar on her lips but heartfelt nonetheless. Thomas smiled faintly, then stood and returned to the house, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The next morning brought another challenge. A storm rolled in unexpectedly, dark clouds gathering on the horizon as the wind picked up speed. Lightning split the sky, followed by deafening cracks of thunder. The animals grew restless, and the boys scrambled to secure loose tools and equipment before the rain hit. Naya joined Margaret in bringing food and supplies indoors, her movements quick and efficient despite her condition. As the first drops of rain fell, everyone gathered inside, huddled around the fire as the storm raged outside. It was during this chaos that Naya's strength truly shone. When the barn door flew open, threatening to tear off its hinges, she sprang into action, grabbing a rope and tying it securely to prevent further damage. When the chickens panicked and scattered, she helped round them up, calming them with gentle words and steady hands. Her actions didn't go unnoticed. Thomas watched her with admiration, realizing just how much they relied on her resilience and resourcefulness. By the time the storm passed, leaving puddles glistening in the sunlight, Naya had earned a newfound level of respect from everyone in the household. In the days that followed, the storm seemed to mark a turning point. Neighbors who had been critical began to soften their stance, impressed by Naya's contributions to the community. She used her knowledge of herbs to treat a neighbor's sick child, mixing poultices and teas that brought relief when nothing else had worked. Another time, she helped a farmer identify edible plants growing near his fields, saving him a trip to town for supplies. Slowly but surely, her presence became less of a source of contention and more of a blessing. Even so, Naya remained cautious. She knew better than to let her guard down completely. The scars of abandonment and prejudice ran deep, and she understood that trust was fragile. Still, she allowed herself to hope for Ayana's future, for the baby growing inside her, and for the possibility of finding a place where she truly belonged. Life wasn't perfect, and challenges still loomed on the horizon, but for the first time in a long while, Naya felt a flicker of optimism. Perhaps, she thought, it was possible to build a new life, not forgetting the past, but learning to live alongside it. As the seasons shifted, the homestead settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural. The crisp air of autumn brought with it a flurry of activity, harvesting crops, preserving food for the winter, and preparing the animals for colder days ahead. Naya threw herself into the work, finding solace in its familiarity. Though many of the tasks were new to her, she approached them with determination, learning quickly from Margaret and Thomas. Her hands, once calloused from weaving baskets and tanning hides, now bore fresh marks from pulling weeds and chopping wood. Yet there was a sense of pride in what she accomplished each day, a reminder that she was contributing to something greater than herself. Ayana continued to thrive, her laughter becoming a constant presence around the homestead. She had fully embraced her role as a playmate to Samuel and Jacob, their games growing more elaborate with time. One afternoon, they built a small fort out of hay bales and blankets, declaring it their castle. Ayana ruled as queen, her makeshift crown fashioned from twigs and feathers, while the boys served as her loyal knights. Watching them from the kitchen window, Naya couldn't help but smile. It was a stark contrast to the quiet, somber child who had arrived at the homestead just months earlier. This version of Ayana was vibrant and full of life, a testament to the healing power of kindness and acceptance. But not all changes were so positive. The tension between the settlers and Naya's presence lingered, bubbling beneath the surface, like an ember waiting to ignite. While some neighbors had softened their stance, others remained openly hostile. Rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by fear and ignorance. Some claimed Naya was a spy for her tribe, sent to gather information about the settlers' weaknesses. Others whispered that her presence would bring bad luck or even danger to the community. These accusations stung, though Naya tried not to let them show. She focused instead on proving her worth, hoping that actions would speak louder than words. One chilly morning, as frost clung to the grass, a group of men rode up to the homestead. They were led by Jonas, the same man who had confronted Thomas weeks earlier. Their arrival sent a ripple of unease through the household. Naya watched from the doorway as Thomas stepped outside to meet them, his expression calm but resolute. The men dismounted, their faces stern and unyielding. Jonas spoke first, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Thomas, we've come to give you one last chance. Send her away or face the consequences." The air grew thick with tension. Naya's heart pounded in her chest as she clutched Ayanna protectively. Margaret stood nearby, her arms crossed tightly over her chest while the boys peeked nervously from behind the barn. Thomas didn't waver. "I won't turn my back on someone in need," he said firmly. "Naya and her children are part of this family, and I'll defend them if I have to." His words hung in the air, bold and unwavering. For a moment no one moved. Then Jonas spat on the ground and turned his horse, signaling for the others to follow. As they rode off, the sound of their hooves faded into the distance, leaving behind an uneasy silence. Inside the cabin, emotions ran high. Margaret hugged Naya tightly, whispering reassurances that everything would be okay. But Naya knew better. The confrontation had only deepened the divide, and she feared what might happen next. That night, as everyone gathered around the fire, the mood was somber. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, their usual chatter replaced by quiet whispers. Naya sat apart from the group, staring into the flames as tears streamed silently down her face. She felt torn between gratitude for the family who had taken her in, and guilt for the trouble she had brought upon them. Despite the looming threat, life at the homestead continued. Winter arrived sooner than expected, blanketing the fields in snow and forcing everyone indoors. The cabin became a refuge, its warmth and coziness a stark contrast to the harshness of the world outside. Naya spent her days helping Margaret bake bread, mend clothes, and care for the animals in the barn. She also used the time to teach Ayanna stories and traditions from her Comanche heritage, ensuring that her daughter wouldn't forget where she came from. These lessons were simple: songs about the stars, tales of brave warriors, and instructions on how to identify medicinal plants, but they carried immense meaning. As the weeks passed, Naya's pregnancy progressed, bringing both joy and anxiety. She often placed a hand on her swollen belly, marveling at the life growing inside her. Yet the thought of giving birth in such uncertain times weighed heavily on her mind. What kind of world would this child be born into? Would they face the same hardships she had endured? These questions haunted her, especially during sleepless nights when the wind howled outside and the fire dwindled to embers. Margaret noticed Naya's growing concern and did her best to ease it. She shared stories of her own pregnancies, describing the joys and challenges of motherhood. She assured Naya that she would be there every step of the way, offering support and guidance. "We'll get through this together," Margaret said one evening as they sat knitting by the fire. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight of sincerity that comforted Naya deeply. When the baby finally arrived, it was during a particularly cold night in late January. Snow covered the ground, and the wind rattled the windows as Naya went into labor. Margaret sprang into action, boiling water, gathering clean cloths, and sending Thomas to fetch the midwife from a neighboring farm. The hours that followed were long and difficult, filled with moments of pain and uncertainty. But Naya drew strength from the people around her: Margaret's steady hands, Thomas's reassuring presence, and Ayanna's wide-eyed curiosity as she peeked into the room. Finally, just as dawn broke over the horizon, a cry filled the cabin. Naya collapsed against the pillows, exhausted but overwhelmed with relief. Margaret wrapped the newborn in a soft blanket and handed him to his mother. Tears streamed down Naya's face as she gazed at her son, his tiny fingers curling instinctively around hers. In that moment, all the fear and doubt melted away, replaced by a fierce love that defied explanation. Ayanna crept closer, peering at her new brother with wonder. "What's his name?" she asked softly. Thomas suggested naming the boy Elijah, after his late father. It wasn't a traditional Comanche name, but Naya agreed, seeing it as a symbol of unity, a bridge between her past and the future she was building with this new family. Over the following days, the homestead buzzed with excitement. Neighbors who had once been critical stopped by to see the baby, their attitudes softened by curiosity and perhaps even a hint of envy. Babies had a way of bringing people together, transcending differences and reminding everyone of the fragility and beauty of life. For Naya, the birth of Elijah marked a turning point. It wasn't just the beginning of a new chapter for her family. It was a reaffirmation of hope. Despite the challenges they faced, the prejudice, the threats, the uncertainty, she believed they could overcome anything as long as they stayed together. Life at the homestead wasn't perfect, and the road ahead would undoubtedly be fraught with obstacles. But for the first time in a long while, Naya allowed herself to dream of a brighter future, not just for herself, but for Ayanna, and Elijah as well. As spring returned to the plains, the homestead came alive with new energy. The snow melted away, revealing patches of green grass and wildflowers that swayed gently in the breeze. Birds chirped merrily, and the air carried the earthy scent of freshly turned soil. For Naya, this season felt like a fresh start, a chance to plant seeds not just in the fields but also in her heart. Life had begun to feel less fragile, more grounded, yet she knew better than to let her guard down completely. The world outside the homestead still held dangers, and the tension between settlers and her presence remained unresolved. Elijah grew quickly, his tiny features softening as he gained weight and strength. He was a quiet baby, rarely crying unless he was hungry or needed changing. Ayanna adored him, often carrying him around the cabin wrapped snugly in a blanket. She sang songs to him in a mix of broken English and Comanche words, her voice sweet and earnest. Watching her daughter care for her brother filled Naya with pride. It reminded her of how far they had come since those desperate days on the open plains. But even in moments of joy, shadows lingered at the edges of her thoughts. She couldn't forget the hostility some settlers still harbored toward her and her family. One morning, as Naya worked alongside Margaret in the garden, planting rows of corn and beans, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Both women looked up to see a group of men riding toward the homestead. Their hearts sank when they recognized Jonas leading the pack. This time, however, he wasn't alone. There were at least 6 others with him, their faces grim and determined. Thomas stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag as the riders pulled up near the house. His expression hardened when he saw the size of the group. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice steady despite the unease in the air. Jonas dismounted slowly, his eyes scanning the property before settling on Naya, who stood frozen beside Margaret. "We gave you a chance," Jonas said, his tone cold and accusing. "But it's clear you're not going to listen. Folks are getting restless, Thomas. They don't feel safe with her here." He pointed directly at Naya, his finger trembling, slightly with anger. "If you won't send her away, we'll make sure she leaves ourselves." The threat hung heavy in the air, sending a chill through everyone present. Naya instinctively moved closer to Margaret, clutching Ayanna's hand tightly. The little girl clung to her mother, her wide eyes darting between the men and Thomas. Inside the cabin, Elijah began to fuss, his cries adding to the tension. Thomas took a step forward, positioning himself between the riders and his family. "You're not taking anyone from this home," he said firmly, his voice rising above the baby's wails. "Naya and her children are under my protection, and I won't stand by while you threaten them." For a moment, no one moved. The standoff stretched on, the only sounds being the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a hawk. Then one of the men spoke up, his voice hesitant. "Thomas, maybe there's another way. Nobody wants trouble, but folks are scared. Can't you at least talk to them? Explain things?" Thomas hesitated, glancing back at Naya. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with quiet determination. She nodded almost imperceptibly, trusting him to do what was best. Turning back to the group, Thomas said, "Fine. We'll meet tomorrow at the church. But until then, leave my family alone." After a long pause, Jonas reluctantly agreed, mounting his horse and signaling for the others to follow. As they rode off, the tension eased slightly, though the fear remained palpable. That night, the household gathered around the fire, discussing what had happened. Margaret suggested inviting neighbors who had shown kindness to attend the meeting, hoping their voices might sway opinions. Naya listened quietly, her mind racing. She knew the coming day would be difficult, but she also understood the importance of standing firm. If she backed down now, all the progress she had made would crumble. With a deep breath, she resolved to face whatever came next with courage. The next morning, the church was crowded with settlers, their faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Thomas stood at the front, flanked by Margaret and Naya. Ayana sat on her mother's lap, holding Elijah protectively. When Thomas began speaking, his voice carried authority and conviction. He recounted the story of finding Naya and Ayana abandoned on the plains, emphasizing their vulnerability and humanity. He described the contributions Naya had made to the community, her knowledge of herbs, her hard work on the farm, and her role as a caregiver to those in need. When it was Naya's turn to speak, she rose slowly, her hands trembling. Though nervous, she met the gaze of the crowd, searching for understanding. In halting English, she thanked Thomas and Margaret for saving her life and expressed gratitude to those who had welcomed her, despite their fears. She explained that she didn't seek to cause harm but simply wanted to raise her children in peace. Her words were simple yet powerful, cutting through the prejudice that had clouded people's judgment. By the end of her speech, several women in the audience were wiping tears from their eyes. The meeting concluded without violence, though tensions remained high. Some neighbors continued to oppose Naya's presence, but others pledged their support, promising to defend her if necessary. Over the following weeks, these allies became a buffer against further threats. They invited Naya to gatherings, introduced her to newcomers, and helped dispel rumors about her intentions. Slowly, the tide began to shift. Life at the homestead returned to its routine, though the memory of the confrontation lingered. Naya threw herself into her work, finding comfort in the rhythm of daily tasks. She taught Ayana and Elijah stories of her ancestors, ensuring they stayed connected to their roots while embracing the new world around them. Margaret and Thomas remained steadfast in their support, treating Naya and her children as equals rather than outsiders. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Naya stood outside the cabin, watching Ayana chase fireflies with Samuel and Jacob. Elijah slept peacefully in her arms, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Behind her, Thomas and Margaret sat on the porch, laughing softly as they shared a cup of tea. In that moment, Naya allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope, a belief that perhaps despite everything they could build a future together. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but surrounded by love and resilience, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Years passed, and the homestead became a place of harmony and shared purpose. The bond between Naya, Thomas, and Margaret grew stronger with each passing season, their lives intertwined in ways neither had imagined when they first met. Ayana blossomed into a confident young girl, her laughter echoing across the fields as she played with Samuel and Jacob. Elijah, too, was growing quickly, his curious eyes taking in everything around him. Together, they formed an unlikely family, united, not by blood, but by love and resilience. The hostility from some settlers never fully disappeared, but it softened over time. Neighbors who had once been wary of Naya began to see her for what she truly was, a hardworking woman devoted to her children and grateful for the kindness shown to her. Her knowledge of herbs and natural remedies proved invaluable during illnesses that swept through the community. When a neighbor's child fell ill with fever, Naya brewed teas using plants she had learned about from her mother. Her treatments worked where others had failed, earning her respect and gratitude. Slowly, the whispers of suspicion turned into murmurs of admiration. Margaret often marveled at how much Naya had contributed to their lives. She watched as Naya taught Ayana and Elijah traditional Comanche songs and dances, ensuring they stayed connected to their heritage. At the same time, Naya embraced aspects of settler life, learning English more fluently and adapting to new customs. This blending of cultures created something unique, a patchwork of traditions that enriched everyone involved. Even the boys, Samuel and Jacob, picked up bits of Naya's language, proudly showing off phrases like thank you and good morning whenever visitors came by. Thomas, too, found himself changed by Naya's presence. He admired her quiet strength and unwavering determination. When he fell ill one winter with a stubborn cough, it was Naya who nursed him back to health. She spent long nights by his bedside, brewing medicinal teas and keeping the fire stoked to ward off the cold. Her care reminded him of Margaret's gentle touch, yet it carried its own distinct warmth, a reminder of the bond they had forged through adversity. By the time spring arrived, Thomas felt stronger than ever, both physically and emotionally. As the years went on, challenges still arose, but they were faced together. One summer, a drought threatened the crops, leaving everyone worried about food shortages. Naya used her knowledge of wild plants to supplement their meals, teaching the others which roots and berries were safe to eat. They worked side by side, under the scorching sun, digging irrigation ditches to save what little water they could. It was exhausting work, but the effort brought them closer, reinforcing the idea that survival required cooperation rather than division. Ayanna and Elijah grew up hearing stories from both worlds, the tales of brave warriors and sacred rituals, passed down by Naya, and the legends of pioneers and settlers told by Thomas and Margaret. These stories shaped them into children who understood the value of diversity and compassion. Ayanna especially took after her mother, showing a keen interest in healing and nature. She often accompanied Naya on walks, learning how to identify plants and prepare medicines. Elijah, meanwhile, idolized Thomas, following him around the farm and eagerly helping with chores. Watching her children thrive filled Naya with pride, knowing they would carry forward the lessons of resilience and unity. One autumn evening, as golden leaves swirled in the breeze, the family gathered around a bonfire outside the cabin. The fine air smelled of roasted corn and wood smoke, and the sound of laughter mingled with the crackling flames. Ayanna and the boys performed a skit they had rehearsed, acting out a playful version of Naya's journey to the homestead. Though exaggerated for humor, it captured the essence of her courage and the kindness of Thomas and Margaret. When the performance ended, everyone clapped and cheered, including Naya, whose eyes glistened with tears. Later that night, as the fire burned low, Naya sat alone for a moment, reflecting on how far they had come. She thought about the days when she and Ayanna had wandered the plains hungry and afraid, unsure if they would survive. Now she looked around at the faces of those she loved, her children, Thomas, Margaret, and even the boys, and felt a deep sense of belonging. It wasn't the life she had imagined, but it was one she cherished deeply. Margaret joined her by the fire, handing her a cup of warm tea. "You've done so much for us," Margaret said softly. "Not just for me and Thomas, but for the whole community. People see you differently now because of your strength." Naya smiled, shaking her head slightly. "I didn't do it alone," she replied. "You and Thomas gave me a home when I had nothing. That's why I stay, to give back, to help." Their conversation drifted to the future, imagining what lay ahead for Ayanna and Elijah. Would they choose to stay on the homestead, or would they venture out into the wider world? Whatever path they chose, Naya knew they would carry the values instilled in them, values of kindness, perseverance, and understanding. As the stars twinkled overhead, casting a soft glow over the land, she felt a profound sense of peace. Life would always have its struggles, but surrounded by love and support, she believed they could overcome anything. In the end, Naya's story became a testament to the power of humanity transcending prejudice. What had begun as an act of desperation, two abandoned souls finding refuge with strangers, had transformed into a legacy of unity and hope. The homestead stood as a symbol of what was possible when people chose compassion over fear, cooperation over division. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly hold challenges, Naya faced it with the same courage that had carried her this far, knowing she was no longer alone.